Hello, and welcome to Working Lunch, the Slow Chambers weekly series where we get to sit down with leaders in our community and help us connect with our fellow community members. It hopefully allows us to bring back some of that connection we've been missing during these challenging times and maybe get to learn some new things about people we interact with or maybe have never met before. I'm Jim D'Antona, President and CEO of the Slow Chamber, and today you're going to be a part of my conversation with journalism professor and author Kim Bisheff. Before joining Cal Poly, Kim worked with the LA Times and Outside Magazine, was a freelancer, authored an award-winning book, and chaired the journalism department at Cuesta College. She specializes in public affairs reporting, media entrepreneurship, and news literacy, frequently writing and speaking about the spread of misinformation through social networks, which happens maybe a little bit. Kim is also an incredibly engaged community member and has served on a number of slow city advisory bodies, including the City Planning Commission. I'm so looking forward to our conversation to hear about the state of the journalism industry, hopes for the next generation of journalists, and getting to know a little bit more about what drives her passion for informed civic engagement. Kim, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Fabulous. Well, let's start out the way we normally do and ask where you zooming in from and what's on the lunch menu today.
So I am zooming in from my home, specifically from my son's tree house, which I've co-opted. It is now my Zoom room. And for lunch today, I will be enjoying Petra. I am a sucker for their warm pita bread. Can't get enough.
That's awesome. And it's incredibly cool to have commandeered the treehouse. That's kind of a fun new spot we haven't had any of our guests come in from. So good for you.
Great. It's nice and quiet up here and the scenery is fantastic.
That's fun. Well, let's start from the beginning. What kind of initially brought you to SLO? Are you a native or what kind of got you to this place?
Now, I grew up in Southern California and went to college in LA. And once on a spring break trip, a bunch of friends drove up to Oregon, and on the way home, we got tired. So we pulled out our Thomas guides. I don't know if you're old enough to remember Thomas guides, but we were flipping through the pages and we saw this park on the coast called Montaña de Oro. And we pulled in late at night, and I woke up in the morning and went for a walk on the bluffs by myself and just thought, I have got to get back here. This is the place. So years later, my husband got a job here, and that was in 2002. And we've been here ever since.
It's that's a pretty amazing. And you can really tell the age of a person when you can say the Thomas guide.
That's
and
right.
they know what you're talking about, because you have to flip to page 42 and then go find page 42. And where does that connect? Oh my God.
Right. Yeah, there's an art to it for sure. I'd like to see some kids these days try to find the right map.
It's like that funny when we saw I don't know if you saw the video of the kids trying to do a rotary telephone,
Yes.
which awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about, obviously you have an interest in journalism that you've made a career of. Did that start out as the plan? Were you always there, or what sparked your interest for journalism?
So honestly, when I was in middle school, I found out that if I signed up for a journalism class, they'd let me get out of taking home ec. So I got into journalism to get out of home ec. I still don't really know how to sew, but I have no regrets. I just, from that moment on, I thought it was so much fun. I couldn't imagine why anybody wouldn't want to do it. And so I just kind of stayed the course from there.
That's funny. So that's a great reason to do it. And I love that to get out of a class, but that you found a passion out of it. So was there a writer or an anchor that kind of you idolized, or a particular story that kind of drew you in to kind of flourish that passion?
Sure. I loved the whole process. And, I grew up watching the evening news with my family after dinner. And I was really drawn to all of those anchors. But there was also, I have a family member who used to host Meet the Press in the 70s. And so, journalism as a profession was always kind of mythologized in our family. And so it just felt like a natural fit for something that Lisagor would go into.
That's amazing. And yeah, it's one of those rare experiences. So that's awesome to have that connection back to it. So what was your first job in the industry? Did you jump right in as a reporter?
Mhm. I had lots of little internships, with my hometown paper, where I covered the Ventura County Fair, the lemon juice drinking contest. That was my first story that actually landed on the front page of the Camarillo Daily News. um, and worked in my college paper, but really my first kind of job came through an internship attempt. I I decided to apply for an internship at the LA Times at the Ventura Bureau. And I was feeling pretty confident about things. I walked in with my clips from high school and the local paper and college, and showed my resume to the bureau chief. And he leaned across the desk and said, "Kimberly, you don't just walk into the Los Angeles Times and start reporting." And I was devastated and embarrassed, and I walked back out, and the receptionist who I had started chatting with while I was waiting for my interview said, asked me how it went, and I told her, and she said, "Well, I just got permission to hire an administrative intern, so why don't you come work for me?" And so I did, and I would type in birth announcements and death notices, and I would file old papers in the morgue. And, after that was the first 30 minutes of my job, and I would just twiddle my thumbs. So it took me about a week to work up the courage to walk over to the city desk and introduce myself and ask if I could help. And the city editor didn't know what kind of intern I was and just handed me a stack of press releases and said, "Can you write some briefs?" I said, "Sure." And I found out what briefs were and started writing, and that eventually led to a job in the newsroom.
I think there's a great story in there just about don't just do what you're handed. Go out there and go get, if you want to do something, go out and get it. That's
That's
awesome.
right. That's right. It turns out that sometimes you can just walk into the Los Angeles Times and start reporting. Who knew?
As someone who used to work with the LA Times, I think they'd be better off if they would start doing that. Just
Things
kidding.
have changed a lot since then, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, one of the things that's so kind of, as someone who, been around politics, been in government, been part of this civic engagement, journalism is one of those ways that you get connected to all of it. And over the past few years, there's been seemingly endless criticisms of journalism and journalists, with the proclamation that the industry's imminent demise, that it's not going to survive all this. So we know all the problems, and I don't want to spend a lot of time kind of rehashing that. I'm hoping maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the solutions that are emerging, and that, what does the long term kind of look like?
Yeah, I actually am feeling more optimistic about the industry than I have in a long time. I think we've passed the bottom. I hope. I feel like there's this sense, there's this realization that maybe the assumption we've had for a while now that information should be free is not the best way to find out about the world. And so I feel confident that consumers are going to start investing in quality information. Um, there's a lot happening in the business models realm. There's an organization called Lion. It's a group of independent online news organizations. They're coming up with great ways to exist. NewsHawk in Santa Barbara is one of them, and they're one of the few organizations that has been hiring consistently. There's a ton in the media innovation and entrepreneurship world, even locally. I teach a class on that subject, and we're introducing journalism students to these entrepreneurship concepts and just entrepreneurial thinking, where you can identify your community and identify problems in that community, and then innovate around solutions. And I've just been so impressed and inspired by what the students are coming up with. There was a group that actually was working with Snapchat to develop to use their geolocation technology to deliver micro-targeted news to students on campus. That's cool, and it's something I certainly never would have thought of. There's another group that came up with a very short news podcast that's directed to college students that they can consume while they're walking from class to class. That actually went to the hatchery where they're getting help developing that and turning it into a real world thing. And the other thing I'm really hopeful about, there's this trend towards something called solutions journalism. You know, a lot of people turn away from news because it just feels so heavy all the time. And there is, you know, that it's fact that a big fire is news. The absence of a fire isn't necessarily news. But solutions journalism is kind of a Mr. Rogers like approach to that problem. You know, you want to find the helpers and see what they're doing. Who are the people who are working on these problems, and what stories can we tell about them?
It's incredibly interesting. And you touched on something there that I think is really kind of fun or, sad in our time. It could, in terms of a discussion, it's, the idea that, we are consuming like TikTok, Twitter's bite-sized information is all we can kind of take in. And no one's, are people really going to dig in? Because some of these subjects cannot be fully vetted or discussed in that short form. Is that a thing we're just going to have to live with? Or do you see like there's a balance somewhere between long form, short form kind of reporting?
There's been some great long form reporting that's still happening. But I do think there's this tendency that we have now to consume information in bite-sized chunks. I'm certainly guilty of that myself. Like if I'm reading something longer than a tweet, then I feel myself start to get impatient. But I think, it's important for us to create that mindset where we're just going to relax into a piece of journalism and get beyond the headline, for lots of reasons, and just sit with it and appreciate the literature, and appreciate the narrative, and appreciate the depth of understanding that only comes from those long form, pieces.
And one of the things that, certainly, COVID isn't helping this on any level is because everybody's trying to provide that. You talked a little bit about it, that pay for some of this good information when you're getting, quality products. Yeah, you should be paying for it. And obviously people are trying to keep people informed during COVID. And so they're giving away some of this for free. Um, do you see any potential problems of building a pay for scale and potentially ending up with just echo chambers all kind of over the place, as like you buy the one that tells you the thing you want to hear?
Yeah, that's a big problem. I mean, in olden times when we were consuming news, there were just a few choices, right? And we all read the same newspaper that landed on our driveway, and we listened to the same news network shows. I think that a few winners are still going to emerge, especially in that local news space. We all know where to get reliable information. We just don't all choose to pay for that reliable information. And yeah, so I think that's where we need to start, just with this understanding that good reporting, good journalism costs some money, and if we're willing to throw a couple lattes worth of our funds at as trusted news source every month, then we'll be able to continue to get that information.
Yeah, it's definitely along those lines, where we apply some of those things. If we want to see fair trade chocolate, if we want to see fair trade clothing and textiles and things that it's going to cost us, pay our farm workers in the field to do pay them a living wage to pull all of our fruit and our vegetables. One of those things that we need to kind of start the conversation on is for the journalists to be able to survive, we've got to be able to pay and not have it just be kind of all over, right?
Right, absolutely. And it's unfortunately it's a self-perpetuating problem. The less funding our newsrooms get, the fewer reporters they have covering the community. And it's not that those reporters are working overtime and doing a fantastic job, but there's only so much you can do when you've got one person who's somehow supposed to be covering government in the entire county, and maybe education too. Like, that's just not sustainable. That's too much to ask of any one individual. We need to build our newsrooms back to what they once were.
Yeah, and I think we see a lot of folks, locally potentially. Well, why aren't they covering these things? And to your point, exactly, is that well, we've got to make the business model work so that they can hire people to cover multiple sections. Because that's what it used to happen, right? When your first experienced the LA Times, there were tons of people covering different things, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. There would be one person on the crime beat, and that's all they were doing. Several people covering education in the county, several people covering government. You feasibly could go to every city council meeting and supervisors meeting, and not just the ones that readers are going to be clamoring for because there's a well-known contentious issue coming up.
Yeah, and looking at the current state of like the business model of, is there kind of, are there things in order to try and meet this need? Are there things that are helping kind of create a problem of that trust in journalism, or in terms of how to get that pay? You want to get eyes on it. Are we seeing a little bit more of that kind of splash clickbait stuff kind of going on?
Trust is the big issue right now. We're seeing a crisis of trust, not just in our news institutions, but in all of our institutions. People just simply have lost trust, and so it's a the problem that's particular to the news industry is that there were some early missteps that further eroded that trust. This notion that we need to create headlines that get people to click on a story, that turned out to be a really bad idea. It may get you some increased traffic in the beginning, in the short term, but then when people start to feel like they're being tricked or like the headline doesn't accurately reflect what's in the story, then they stop clicking. So I think we're seeing a little bit of a realization, not across the board, but there's a big news company that's talking about paying its reporters based on traffic, which is a step backwards. But there is this growing realization that we need to practice radical transparency with our readers. So it's about writing headlines that accurately reflect the content of the story, and it's about letting readers in on the process of creating the news. So it was always something that kind of happened behind closed doors. We would deliver the news product to you, and there was no public participation in how that product was made. So one of the things we're doing around trust is showing our work. I'm constantly telling my students now, show your work. Where did you get that piece of information that you just shared? It's not enough to have a fact statement in your story. You need to link to the primary document that fact statement came from so that everyone can retrace your steps. You see individual journalists more active on social media these days, and part of that is driven by this quest for transparency. We want to let the public in on the process of reporting so that when they see that final product, they know how they got there.
That's incredibly important. And, it's fabulous to be able to utilize that. But it's one of those interesting problems that you run into because most of the reporting we see today, and especially on these really key, big, important topics, people are having to go on background or anonymous, and leaves open that idea open to challenge, right? Like, well, where'd you get it? Who made it up? Angry employee, whatever, all of those topics. And so, is it the idea then maybe to build trust over those other articles that aren't that huge level so that when you say an anonymous source, it fits?
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's this misconception about anonymous sources. They're never anonymous to the reporter. They're only anonymous to the reader. But you have to have built that trust relationship with your audience before you start citing anonymous sources. If you don't have that trust relationship, then all that reporting, you're gonna have a hard time with how that information is received by the public.
It's very interesting, and such, journalism obviously is a key to understanding, making local policy, and understanding as a resident, as a citizen, what it is. So, when you're teaching your classes and stuff, do you talk about why good journalism is so important for good local policy?
For sure. I mean, good local policy starts with an engaged electorate. And if we don't have, if we're not keeping our community members informed of what's happening at every level of government, then they're going to have a really hard time making decisions based on factual information. And unfortunately, disinformation loves a vacuum. And when there's a shortage of accurate information that's getting out to the public, then it is very quickly backfilled with rumor, and that's not good for anybody or any community.
Yeah, and you get into that whole, how do you prove a negative, or
Yeah.
that's something that doesn't exist. It becomes impossible. But as we said, kind of in the opening, you got involved, right? You jumped in to the city. So, what made you want to actually become involved in the city kind of workings?
Years ago when I first moved here, I went to one of the budget planning meetings that happens every 2 years. I didn't even know that was a thing, but a friend had invited me. And it was the meeting where a bunch of kids showed up and they wanted to ask city council to prioritize the skate park. And I remember just watching like kid after kid after kid speak at the microphone, and they got up and they placed their stickers. And so many people who were in the room were moved by their words that we placed our stickers too. And sure enough, they showed up in numbers and engaged in the process, and city council prioritized that skate park that now exists. That was really transformative for me. It made me feel like, oh, we as community members do have a say. Government isn't something that's imposed on us. It's something that we can actively participate in. And so I kind of got hooked on that and never let go.
It's so funny because coming here, obviously, I had spent time in the city government, but in a very large one. So there was no way we were going to ever be the dotting process. But it was so funny to see like how engaged the citizenry and the council was engaging with its population. So when you went to then, I assume that kind of got you linked into serving on the city planning commission and digging into the depths of land use. Did you think that helped, and would you encourage more people to kind of serve on some of these advisory bodies?
Absolutely. There's no better way to get a crash course in whatever subject you're talking about on an advisory committee than to serve on that advisory committee. Our city staff is really wonderful, and there's a teaching element in their job where they will take all of us newbies who volunteer for committees, and they will help us translate staff reports into language that we understand. I wish every citizen could go through that education process, because it gives you such a great window into how communities work and how decisions are made, and how when after decisions are made by our elected officials, um, how they're actually implemented. It's fascinating, and I definitely recommend that at some point everyone who cares about an issue in the city, whether it's transportation or housing or anything, the place to start is on one of those advisory bodies because you get a real education.
Yeah, I agree, and and you get to see, whether you agree or disagree with your elected officials or whoever, you get to see the difficult decisions that have to be made every day when you sit up there. And when you, as serving on the city planning commission, I've served on the city planning commission, those decisions you have to make are not easy. There's a give and take and a pro and a con to all of them, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. There were definitely nights when I'd wake up at 2 a.m. thinking, oh, that was not the right decision. I loved the homework, but the stress around making that decision, and taking all of the information we have and synthesizing it and trying to hear all the voices, it's not easy.
Very difficult. And so kind of what in getting involved in the city, what do you see, or do you have some kind of, if as you look forward for, being here, I hope the long term, as all of these Facebook posts or on Facebook Live are saying what an asset you are to our community. We hope
Oh,
you're
that's
around for a long time.
nice.
What is it? What do you see kind of, what are your hopes for the future kind of our community?
I'm really excited about the fact that, San Luis Obispo is really good at creating opportunities for citizens to engage in the process, whether they're able to physically go to meetings or not. But I don't think our culture has caught up with that yet. I think, a lot of us feel like government is something that other people participate in and don't even know how to get involved. So my hope is that I'll get to work on some sort of new solution to the civic engagement problem, and maybe work with the city to getting more community members aware and involved in all the ways that they can participate.
It's a great, yeah, absolutely. And it's really, as we can bring government to the people, the understanding grows, the trust grows, all of that, as you've been talking about. So that's
Yep,
so
it's all
fabulous.
connected.
Well, so looking at, obviously we know, everybody knows the downsides of the pandemic, and everybody has their negatives, but always asking and always trying to find out, have you found any silver linings or changes that have occurred because of the pandemic that you hope will become permanent?
Sure. I mean, the obvious one is our parklets downtown. That is so cool. I love walking downtown. It feels so vibrant and people are outside enjoying the community. Hope that sticks around. I've enjoyed the opportunity to like being forced to simplify our lives. Asking, does this really need to be a meeting or can we handle it in an email? And limiting even our social groups to choosing quality over quantity. Um, I've also been excited to see the handshake go away. I know that's such a minor thing. I miss hugs. I look forward to hugs coming back, but the handshake, it had a good run. It can be over now. It's time to move on.
That's hilarious. That's great. It's going to be a while because I see some people really holding on to that one and still trying to pull that off even today. So that's funny, and it's great to hear. It's a really interesting ideas of the things that we should be looking forward to, and I think people are making that adaptation. So let's do a hypothetical. If you weren't in journalism and teaching, what type of work do you think you'd be doing right now?
Oh gosh, comedy writing. I mean, who doesn't want to write for Comedy Central, right? Political speech writing, funny political speeches, I guess would be roller derby star. I did think about going back to school to study city and regional planning because it's just fascinating to me to see who actually gets the stuff done in our communities. These decisions are handed down to planners and they actually figure out how to make them happen. So that's a fascinating career option for me in my next life.
Well, and as someone who had no idea about local government or local planning and land use and got thrown into a job entirely doing that,
Yes.
I would encourage everybody to get involved in that because it is a really interesting discussion. If you want to I mean, it's difficult, it's big, but it's so interesting, right? I mean, it's a fun and impactful kind of learning.
Definitely. I mean, we have all of our knowledge that we acquire just by living in a place about, what we think about housing policy and sustainability and all of those issues. But when you really drill down into the theory behind it and the thinking that's gone into different planning solutions, it's fascinating.
Well, and I just can't let one thing go. Clearly, you threw it in there for a second, and it was roller derby. So maybe just a few seconds on really roller derby, huh?
Oh, it just looks like so much fun. I have to learn to skate first. That's barrier number one. I'm really clumsy on wheels, but what a great way to just get out there. Maybe it seems like such a great way to let out frustrations and to get outside and to just like knock people around.
There you go. Again, a little exercise, get a little of that out, and get a little of the exhaustion out. It actually during a pandemic, if it wasn't for all the touching, sounds like a great idea, right?
Right, right.
That's, so I can't believe we're already a half hour into this. And so, as I'm going to want to wrap up here, I think there's something really interesting I'd love to know is if someone was interested in a media diet reset following November 3rd, or even if they just want to ensure that they are getting kind of accurate election information, what would you kind of recommend?
I'm a big fan of Cal Matters. They have this great voter guide where they go through all of the propositions. They have a 1-minute video about each proposition. They list who's for, who's against. It's not partisan. It's just here's what this thing says, and here's what its supporters and the people who are opposed are saying about it. I think that's a fantastic source of information. I would say most important thing is to get out of your private silos. So the worst place to find information about anything on the ballot is in a private Facebook group. There's some strong psychology happening there where We all love to be surrounded by people who we can gossip and share rumors with, but repetition breeds belief. And when the information that's getting shared in those circles is not accurate, it becomes entrenched in people's belief systems, and then it's really hard to get good information out there. So, that those would be two things to start with. And then, of course, read real news from the source, not through social channels.
I love what you just said there about the kind of the echo chambers forming and, reinforcing our own beliefs. No matter which side you believe, it's happening a lot. So fabulous, fabulous analysis there. So as we always ask, we end with one question. What are you looking forward to this weekend?
I am looking forward to being cold this weekend. It has been such a hot fall. It's supposed to be highs in the mid 60s this weekend. I'm so excited. I'm going to go for a nice long hike with my family. I am going to sit in my favorite chair with my favorite blanket, and I'm going to read the Times cover to cover, except maybe not the opinion section because it stresses me out. And I'm going to catch up on grading.
Yeah, the life of a teacher. That's so fun. Well, Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. Such an interesting conversation. And we're so glad that you spend your time from the treehouse with us.
Thanks so much. It was really fun talking with you, Jim.
It's great. And for all of you that joined us and are watching this, thank you so much for eating lunch with us. We hope to see you next week when we're joined by Ben Taylor of Mama Ganache Chocolates to talk about treats just in time for Halloween. If you have an idea for a future working lunch guest or someone you want to learn more about, send us an email at slowchamber@slowchamber.org. Thanks for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay healthy and safe out there. Bye, everyone.